Hello, everyone. Welcome. Somebody needs to go on mute. Hello. That's much better. Welcome, everyone. This is our third day of Kids and Art Virtual Summit on Art, Health, and Innovation. This is the second last session of the day, and we've been having a great sessions on yoga, meditation, wellness, virtual tours, and a huge number of people attending. So thank you and welcome, everyone. For those of you who do not know about Kids and Art is a Bay Area nonprofit. We provide free art workshops to kids affected by pediatric cancer. You can learn more about Kids and Art on our website, www.kidsandart.org. Let me introduce myself, then I'll give it over to the panelists. I am Kiran Chadha. I'm board member at Kids and Art. I'm also a mom of a cancer survivor. So this topic is very important to me. What are the innovations in pediatric drug development? Let me introduce the panelists. I have Michael Wei and Steve Simko. Both are senior medical directors at Genentech, who have worked on pediatric drug development, worked on clinical, and Cara Davis, who is an assistant professor at Stanford and has worked on clinical trials of novel cell therapies for pediatric oncology, as well as runs her own translational research lab. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time and discussing on such an important topic today. With that, I'll hand it over to the three of you. Please take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kiran. We'd like to thank you, Purvi, Jade, and all the organizers for the opportunity to speak with you at this forum. My name is Michael. I'll help moderate for this panel discussion on innovations in pediatric drug development. I think everyone here at this conference supporting Kids and Art is interested in improving the lives of pediatric patients impacted by disease. And one important way of doing so is by developing new therapies for patients. And so today's panel includes representatives from industry and academia who have worked on pediatric drug development in both of these two settings. I'd like to start with some introductions of the panel, followed by discussion with the panel and then audience questions. There is a messaging feature on the platform, so audience members can submit questions during the panel. I'd also like to add that the views expressed today are the panel participants' personal views and do not necessarily reflect those of the institution where they are from. But with that said, my name is Michael. I work at Genentech, which is a pharma company based in South San Francisco. My role is in late-stage clinical development, where I work on designing and running clinical trials of new medicines with a focus on blood cancers. We evaluate each of our new medicines for their potential role in pediatric diseases, and so I work with the Pediatric Drug Development Group on a couple of molecules. Prior to that, I was an instructor in pediatric oncology at Stanford, where I took care of patients and also worked in the lab on developing novel small molecule for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So with me today are Steve Simko, also a medical director at Genentech, who had several years experience working directly within the Pediatric Drug Development Group at Genentech, and also Cara Davis, assistant professor and researcher in pediatric oncology at Stanford. So Cara, could you please tell us a little bit more about your background?
Absolutely. Let's see if we can get through without the feedback. So I'm an assistant professor of pediatrics at Stanford. As Michael mentioned, sorry, I'm not sure how to fix this. But I have been there for, about 13 years with an interest in taking care of children with leukemia, and particularly have developed an interest for patients with relapse leukemia. I run a translational lab that focuses on using single cell, sort of high parameter types of technologies in looking at pediatric cancers to try to find cell populations that are of clinical relevance. So within the billions of cells that a patient might have at diagnosis, to try to understand cells that might be treatment resistant or cause relapse. On the clinical side, I've been really involved in bringing cellular and immunotherapy trials to patients with cancer, particularly leukemia, but now we're working on a new trial also with brain tumors for cellular therapy for brain tumors. So that's been another arm of my research and my clinical practice.
Great, thanks, Kara. Steve, do you want to give an introduction?
Sure. My name is Steve Simko, and like Kara and Michael, I'm a pediatric hematologist oncologist. I was previously in clinical practice at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston until 2014, and then moved to Genentech to work on pediatric drug development there. And worked in the pediatric drug development group at Genentech for 5 years, and in about the last year have been working with Michael doing drug development for adults with lymphoma. And I also have a clinic at Stanford on a volunteer basis where I see patients with hematologic disorders and rare disorders called histiocytic disorders.
Great, thanks for those introductions. I'd like to start now with some questions for the panel. Kara, as a clinician researcher, what do you think about academia? What are the strengths of academia in terms of pediatric drug development? And also, what are some challenges that you're facing?
So it means that
Kara, do you want to switch to headset? That might help.
I couldn't get my headset to connect. I can try again. Why don't you see if Steve wants to take a try first, and I'll try to get my headset connected.
Yeah, Steve, similar question for, in terms of industry, what do you think are some of the strengths for industry for drug development, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
So I think that when you think about industry and what industry does well, industry is really great at developing a drug, getting that drug to market, and operationalizing not only the clinical trials, but the drug manufacturing, et cetera. The biggest challenge, of course, is that pediatric cancer relative to other diseases, and in comparison with adult cancer, is a much more rare disease. And so there's been a lot of either resistance or lack of knowledge that in the pharma industry that has prevented prioritization of pediatrics early on. I think additionally, historically, there's been reluctance to test new medications in children simply because there's fear that kids are more susceptible to side effects, or that for ethical reasons, you might want to test the drug in a patient who can consent for themselves to get the drug before you really know what the side effect profile is. So there are some legitimate reasons why not to develop in pediatrics first, but then there are plenty of other reasons why pediatrics has, I think in many, pediatric cancer in many ways has been an orphan disease from a drug development perspective. I think we're fortunate to live in an age now where on both sides of the Atlantic, stronger regulations are now in place to compel drug companies to develop in pediatrics and to really encourage them and incentivize them on the one hand, and also require them on the other hand to really think about pediatric development as early as they possibly can, usually defined by regulators as the end of initial safety trials in adults. So this helps those of us who work in the pharma industry and who have the passion and the knowledge to do pediatric cancer drug development. This helps us immensely because it ensures that the drugs that need to get to kids get there. I still think that we have a long way to go in terms of optimizing going early and going fast, figuring out from a pharma perspective how we as drug developers can convince our colleagues that yes, this makes sense, yes, this is reasonably safe, and yes, this will provide important information not only for the development of the drug, but for the care of these patients who are very much in need. So, and the way forward is efforts like this, which are collaborative efforts between academics, industry partners, and you, the non-medical community, but those of you who care about children with cancer, who may be parents of children with cancer, who may yourself be childhood cancer survivors, and all of us working together to push to do what's right for kids.
Yeah, great. I just remember, working on a couple of the molecules where, we had to have a pretty robust pediatric study plan or pediatric investigation plan in place pretty early on, as you mentioned, to meet some of the regulatory requirements. But then it pushed a lot of very interesting thought into how some of these molecules could be developed for those pediatric indications. So Kara, I guess from your perspective in academia, what do you think are some of the strengths of working in academia and some of the challenges?
I think some of the strengths are really that in academia, there's the opportunity to take some more risks. And, in industry, of course, there are shareholders and there are, goals that are programmatic that may not be attainable within a timeline on a pediatric trial. Definitely, as Steve said, these cancers are rare compared to it. Many adult cancers where at a single institution, you can easily complete a clinical trial, within a few years to get to the endpoint that you're looking for. It's a lot harder to do that when at any individual center, you have a handful of patients a year, and to try to get statistically relevant data on new agents. But I think the place where academia is really good is, first of all, a lot of the preclinical work, and the, sort of the very foundational type things, which then to say, we're testing targets, we're testing drugs, and to be able to start and lay the groundwork of those sort of studies. And then once it gets to the point where you say, this is something that might actually have legs, that's where partnering with pharma or industry can be really powerful, because most of the time universities don't have the infrastructure to be able to support rigorous sort of high throughput production or pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic studies that need to be done in early phase trials. And so partnering with industry to try to then accelerate those discoveries or to accelerate getting the discovery to the patient, I think is a really one of the strengths, in that partnership, just like Dr. Simko said.
I've also been really impressed with some of the academic consortia that have been developed, like Children's Oncology Group, Poetic, and some of the St. Jude cooperative groups. I mean, really bringing together a lot of the experts in the field, and then hoping to address, some of the disease science, but as well as, like you said, the numbers at each center and being able to recruit across the consortium.
I mean, I think we know that there's really been a concerted effort and even a legislated effort to try to push pediatric patients into clinical trials, and to be able to push pharma to say, okay, how are you going to try to serve children with this potential drug, before we give approval, with the regulatory agencies, like things like the Race for Children Act. And also, I think there's been a lot more willingness to drop the enrollment ages, so that, usually it's 18, but could you enroll a 16-year-old? Could you enroll a 12-year-old? And I think pharma has been somewhat previously resistant to that. And there's some sort of softening to say, yeah, we'll drop the age to 12 after we get some maybe preliminary safety data in adults. And there's just a lot more flexibility that is opening up access for kids.
Right. And I think as we've learned a little bit more about drug metabolism and lowering that age, that maybe that threshold is a little bit more reasonable. Steve, I think we've discussed some of that a little bit at Genentech too, right?
Yeah, I think that certainly our pediatric development group is pushing company-wide to try to get the age of inclusion for relevant diseases lowered to 12. It provides valuable information about how adolescents can tolerate the drug. And it's well known that across drug development, adolescents have very similar drug metabolism profiles as adults, and you don't need to do separate trials for that population. So there are certain diseases, particularly that overlap teenagers and young adults, whether it's melanoma, thyroid cancer, Hodgkin lymphoma. Those are certainly disease areas where you could enroll adolescents on adult trials to accelerate drug development for younger patients. And then even for the youngest patients, there's growing interest, knowledge, and ability to just start pediatric development sooner. And because pediatric cancers are different from adult cancers, sometimes it is hard to enroll those younger patients in meaningful numbers on those adult trials. And so that's why even though that's an important piece of it, you still have to have that focus on getting the drug into patients as young as possible, as soon as possible. And there are certain drugs where there are reasons why you might not go into the very youngest patients, say under 6 months or a year, but in most cases, you should be able to do it from the very beginning.
Yeah. I think I've heard strong willingness from both industry and academia to partner to bring forth new treatments, working with each other, working with patient advocacy groups. Can you think of specific examples of how to do that, or any experience that you've had with that?
I could say I've been part of a consortium that was sponsored by Stand Up to Cancer and St. Baldrick's, helping to bring immunotherapies forward for kids with cancer. And there's a really strong advocacy component of that group, which is pretty amazing, of parents and, mostly family members who've had children or other family members with cancer. And they have had a very powerful voice within the consortium. And I would say equally as powerful as the investigators in helping to guide direction, thinking about goals. And it's been a really successful partnership. And I think that it's a part of pediatric drug development that maybe is overlooked to some extent. And I think in this one example, it's been a really powerful way to partner with the researchers and the sponsoring, group to try to make sure that there's, progress that's meaningful and helping keep patient and family concerns really sort of top of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been really very useful for partnering with the patient advocacy groups in terms of what are the things to focus on for research and the unmet need. Steve, I think there's also been some discussions about, cross pharma partnerships and prioritizing molecules such that, you may have multiple instances of a certain class of agents and prioritizing those. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example from a workshop that I participated in last year, which was called the Accelerate platform, which is actually it's a European platform, but it's a transatlantic platform that involves academics, industry partners, representatives from the FDA and the European counterpart, as well as patient and family advocates, to get together in a room to talk about all the either drugs in a single class of drugs or talk about all the drugs that are in development in a rare disease. So the one I participated in was for new drugs in development in acute myeloid leukemia. And it's interesting because both adults and children get acute myeloid leukemia, but the biology in children is very different. And it doesn't mean that every drug that's developed in adults even should be developed in children. So, and the regulators can't legally prioritize one drug over another. The pharma companies legally cannot prioritize one drug over another because of worries about collusion. But that's where academics and that's where lay contributors really have a voice in saying, no, this is needed, or yes, this is needed, or no, this is not needed, or yes, this is needed. And we talked about drugs that were, and so a prioritization was developed by this forum, looking at about 25 different drugs or classes of drugs to say, okay, these classes of drugs are sort of the top of the pyramid. These maybe we don't need to do more trials of. There were examples of drugs that had enrolled, had set up a clinical trial, had only enrolled one patient in a year because the drug just didn't make sense for children. And the only reason the trial was being done was that there was an obligation tied to it. So we really have to be, use the science that's developed in preclinical labs in academia to really inform what drugs make sense. We have to think about the biology, and we have to partner to get the drugs to the academics to do this research. So one of the things I did in my role at Genentech was partner with academic labs to set up preclinical testing of all of our drugs, even those that were in early development, so that we could have some idea of what diseases were priority areas for us to focus on, or for us to be able to say, you know what, this drug doesn't seem to be working in childhood cancers in the lab the way it works in adult cancers. Maybe this is not the right approach.
It looks like we have a couple of questions from the audience, or Karen, did you want to?
Yeah, so just to the previous point, how can parents participate and say they want to be part of this, or how will their voice count?
So first of all, it's I can provide information for people who are interested for several organizations. One is called the Accelerate platform, where if you're interested, you can follow along, and ultimately there are ways to participate. And then more importantly, I think, is policy advocacy, public policy advocacy. This is something that I don't think very many of us in pediatric oncology are very good at. We need your help. The legislation that's been recently passed in the US would never have gotten anywhere if it weren't for people like Nancy Goodman and the Kids v. Cancer Foundation, who really spearheaded efforts, the legislative efforts, to make better regulations to compel pharma to develop drugs in children a reality. So I think that finding a foundation that I think it's just a matter of whether you search on your own to find a foundation that works for you, or I can provide the name of a couple of foundations that really, I think, are giving parents a strong advocacy voice and can help us think through these kinds of questions.
Yeah, if you could share that with us, Kids&Art, we can share it with the audience, or if you know them on the top of your head, you can just type it in chat. Yeah, okay, thanks. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Michael, can you see the questions?
I only see.
No worries, I can read it out.
Can you see them? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So the first question is, what is the role of food and well-being and alternative therapies?
I can try to tackle that.
Anyone would like to try that? Yeah.
So I think that, I would say clinically, we don't necessarily make strong recommendations about specific changes in diet or adding or subtracting, certain foods for the most part, and or supplements or alternative therapies. But what I do try to do always with my parents and families and patients is partner to explore things that the family is interested in, or discuss sort of what we do know about nutrition or foods. Obviously, having good nutrition is important, but we don't necessarily dictate. You have to eat this. You shouldn't need to eat this. And I'm always a big advocate of alternative therapies and even supplements, as long as we don't feel that they're counteracting or doing harm, in some way, or putting a patient at risk for infection or side effect. But sometimes we can know that because we know things about the supplements. Sometimes that's harder to know depending on the supplements, and we don't always know what's in them and what their contents may be. But I think it's always a great discussion to have with your doctor. And we actually at Stanford have an alternative sort of health department and people who can help us. And sometimes I've referred patients there who've had a lot of interest.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in Ask Questions is, this conference focuses on conversations about improving care. What is the role of industry in that setting?
So our first role is to ensure that the right trials are done for the right patients, meaning how can we ensure that so just to go back, not all drugs are going to work in every patient. So we have to figure out, our job is to figure out, well, who do we think are the right patient populations to go forward with this drug? And then design clinical trials that will answer the necessary questions to bring those drugs potentially to the clinic where they're approved as fast as possible, while still maintaining scientific integrity, patient safety, those kinds of things. So I'll give you an example. We purchased a company in late 2017 that manufactured a drug called entrectinib. And this drug this company had the foresight to start pediatric development very early on. And so there was already a wealth of data in their patients. And they'd identified that patients with certain mutations really responded well. Our job then was to revise the trials to really focus in on those patient populations where we saw an early efficacy signal. And we were in the drug was so effective, we were in the unusual situation of realizing the drug worked before we really knew what the safety profile was, before we really knew what the right dose was, before we really had a drug product to be able to give to kids. It was sort of upside down drug development. But we were able, our job was to work through those issues as fast as possible and ensure that we had a product that could be delivered to the market, that we had a well-characterized safety profile, and that we had a well-defined patient population so these patients could be treated. So I think that for us, what in our company was an example of where we did our job. And I think that it really, the reason we were able to be as successful as we were, as quickly as we were, is not only did we have company support of what we were doing, but I think we had a team of people who really had the right expertise to be able to move things and the desire to move things forward as fast as possible. And I think, and one of the operational capacity of pharma really is impressive. And so you have to harness that to move things forward quickly.
And I think, the goal for both the industry academia partnership is innovation, understanding the science, and bringing, in terms of improving care, bringing new medicines with a good benefit risk profile, hopefully going away from chemotherapy with all of its side effects towards more targeted therapy, which hopefully will have less long-term side effects for survivors. So with a high cure rate. So I think we're all kind of aligned on those goals to improve care.
That's really good. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time today. This was very useful. Thank you, Dr. Steve, for the links. We will definitely pass it on to our families. And everyone, all the audience, thank you for joining. If you'll have any questions, feel free to forward it to Kids&Art, and we will take it to them, to the panelists. Thank you again. If you liked what you heard, if you want to know more about Kids&Art and support Kids&Art, please check out our website. You can donate using the link below. On our event site, there is a lot of artwork from our kids and professional artists. You can buy those. That sales helps Kids&Art as well. Thank you again. And our next session is right about to start. It's on Zoom. It's a dance session, ecstatic dance session with Robin Parish. It's something different. You may want to try it out. Okay. See you soon, and see everyone there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bianca Levan, and I'm chair of the Artist Committee for Kids&Art. If you liked the video that you just watched, please consider donating by visiting kidsandart.org/donate. Kids&Art is able to provide free workshops for pediatric cancer patients through donations like yours. Thank you.